Welcome to another episode of Desi Matters, where we dive deep into issues that often go unheard within the South Asian community. I'm your host, Kunal Patel, and today we're going to be exploring a topic that's both personal and universal: identity. Identity is a complex and multi-layered concept shaped by our own culture, community, and personal experiences. For many in the South Asian community, identity is often defined by family expectations, cultural norms, and societal pressures. But what happens when your sense of self doesn't align with those expectations? How do you navigate the journey of discovering and embracing your true identity, especially when it comes to challenging traditional norms? In today's episode, I'm delighted to have Kamilla King, who goes by KK, with us. KK is a proud member of the LGBTQIA community and has been an outspoken advocate for intersectionality and inclusion, challenging many stereotypes and misconceptions. KK's unique experience as a South Asian person navigating their queer identity provides invaluable insights into complexities of living authentically in a world that often struggles to accept where it doesn't understand. We'll be diving deep into KK's personal journey, discussing the intersections of culture, sexuality, and identity, and exploring how South Asian communities can become more inclusive and supportive of all its members. This conversation promises to be enlightening, thought-provoking, and above all, real. So without further ado, let's welcome KK to Desi Matters. Welcome, KK.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's lovely to have you and your voice on Desi Matters. And we've known each other for some time, and I thought of bringing you in as a perfect guest to talk about identity. So to start, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you define your own identity?
It's definitely a bit of a loaded question for me somehow. I have various identities as all of us do, and I think from a cultural point of view, my identity is uh, British English. My dad is white, grew up very much like in that London vibe, and my mum is from Singapore, who grew up Muslim. So lots of different cultures kind of coming together and blending. And also, I hold a very strong queer identity. So, yeah, it's lots of different layers, lots of different types of identity that I house within me and I hold very dear to my heart.
And what has your journey been like navigating your identity, particularly as someone who is queer in the LGBTQIA plus community?
It's it's definitely been a challenge. When I first came out to my family was only a few years ago, actually, in 2019. And it was quite challenging for me because there is a large culture clash between um, LGBTQIA plus people and Muslim or Asian culture, particularly in the Muslim realm. And so having the courage to come out to my family, particularly my mum, was a big a big challenge for me to overcome. I I wanted to look inside myself first and feel confident in myself and how I identified before approaching my family with how I was feeling, because I wanted to make sure that I had as many questions answered internally before I went to them. So that way I could answer any questions they may have or any concerns that they have. And it definitely took my mum a few years to get her head around the gayness, the queerness that I have and hold inside me. And now she's definitely on board and she's doing the most work to be able to understand me and hear me and um, yeah, embrace my identity in its entirety, which is really nice. But it definitely was a challenge, and I know it's a really big challenge that faces a lot of particularly queer Muslims in the community, mostly because from the outside looking in, a lot of people kind of have this blanket conception that there's no such thing as a queer Muslim. And there are gay people who fit every single identity across every single culture, across every single place in the entire world. and there is not a single country or location in the world where there is not, some sort of, magical gay sprinkling somewhere. So I think once I, was able to see that and hear stories from other queer Muslim people as well, how they approach conversations with their family, or how they really weren't able to approach conversations with their family and had to hold multiple identities, one for their personal selves and then one for their family selves. I realized that, I was in a privileged position, that I knew that my family wouldn't reject me, which is a big issue that happens in queer spaces, not just in the Muslim side
Yeah.
of the queer community, but across the board. And I knew that I was one of the lucky ones that was not going to be my experience with my family. So I needed to take the challenge to tell them and open up and to merge those two identities, my personal and family identity, into one together, so I could feel more whole.
And how long did it take you to build up the courage to talk to your family? Because you said you came out a few years ago, but obviously you
Mm,
didn't feel like that overnight. It didn't happen
yeah.
overnight. And it must have been like a pivotal moment in your life that helped you embrace your true self, to build up the courage to speak, especially to your Muslim family, to say,
Mm,
this is who I am, this is how I believe I am, and this is how I feel.
absolutely, yeah. It's definitely not a a 5 minute thought in my mind and suddenly it just was like, okay, this is me now. It's definitely been a long time in the making, and retrospectively looking back at my childhood and growing up and my teenage years, there are so many signs that I personally didn't pick up on. I think because I wasn't exposed to gay people, to queer people, to lesbians growing up. So it's difficult to, I think for a lot of people, it's difficult to connect to certain parts of yourself if you don't see that in media or around you, or in your community. So when I went to university when I was 19, I discovered very quickly, I think because I was away from, my everyday, I was away from my family, I was in a completely new space. I moved several miles away from home, home being Surrey, London area, moved up to Leeds for university. I was exposed to this world that just didn't know me, and I could come as myself and then just see what happens. And so I discovered when I was at university that there was this other side of me that I, wasn't just interested at the time, wasn't just interested in men, but I was also very interested in women and female presenting people. And yeah, I wanted to explore that more and understand that more, but was definitely scared about what the family would say, if this is actually me. So I needed to do several years, I think, of internal discovery to feel comfortable with that identity at first,
Yeah.
because of the lack of exposure. And yeah, it took until in 2019 when I realized that actually bisexuality wasn't actually what I felt inside. It wasn't that I had an attraction to men and women. I actually didn't really have this attraction to men at all. And there's something called um what's it called? Um Compulsory heteronormativity. And with this, it's the idea that we get put into a heteronormative society, and so many of us have to do a lot of work to unpick that heteronormativity in our brain. And a lot of the times I couldn't really understand why I didn't quite fit in, or why I wasn't really like my friends, or why I wasn't interested in guys in the same way as my friends, or things like that. And so when it hit 2019, I realized that the partner that I was with at the time was fantastic, and I couldn't understand what the issues were. And I then reflected and looked internally and realized that he wasn't the problem. I was the problem. Not the problem, but what I was feeling was just not aligning with the dynamic of our relationship. And I didn't want this future of getting married to a man and creating this family and having this life that just didn't align with me anymore when I started to unpick these things. So yeah, it took a long time with a lot of courage, and only when we decided to end our relationship did I decide it was the right time to tell my family, because I knew that I was going to be moving forward in my life without
Wow.
wanting to ever date men again.
So that is a pivotal moment that helped you embrace your true self. What do you
Yeah.
think some of the biggest challenges you faced regarding your identity were, especially like leading up to that period, telling your
Mhm.
family, but then also prior to that, while you're still kind of, I think the word is not figuring out, but it's more like understanding what your own identity is and coming to terms with what your identity is and
Mm.
discovering that identity.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges was um, discovering the concept of non-binary. And I will definitely attribute my self-discovery and ability to learn so many things from TikTok, actually. TikTok really helped me a lot because it, all content, stories of real people expressing themselves, how they feel. And this is where I first came across this concept of non-binary. And when I saw so many videos from so many different content creators talking about their non-binary identity, I suddenly realized that I connected all of those things they were talking about. I connected so deeply with them, and I think that's been the hardest. That's been the hardest part. I think my family's definitely been receptive, and the world has definitely been my world around me has definitely been very receptive to um, the queer part of me. I keep using the word queer because that is how I identify. It is a reclaimed word, so it's definitely one, if you're not in the community, to use with caution. It's definitely one to wait for that person to say their own identity first, because it's a reclaimed word in the community. So just to make a note of that.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah,
because it was used derogatory
yeah, it
in
was
the
it was used
80s and
as a derogatory
90s.
term, exactly. And I think come to the generation of the millennials, we've reclaimed it back and said, we're actually using this as our identity because this is how we feel. And I
That's amazing.
identify queerness as an affinity towards people who are not straight. And yeah, and I'm very fluid in that sense because I am non-binary and I have a lot of attraction to non-binary people. So I feel the term queer encompasses, for me at least, it encompasses all these different genders and identities that I am attracted to. So that was
Yeah,
definitely the hardest part, was coming to terms with that, and it's still something that I struggle with because I do use non-binary pronouns, they, them. That is something that is politically a really difficult conversation, is a difficult conversation to find the right ways to correct people, perhaps at work or even in my personal life, especially as when I discovered this side of me, something changed within how I started to present as well. And somehow by claiming this non-binary identity, I felt more confident in the feminine side of myself.
yeah,
And so I started to, as those of you who are watching might be able to see, that I am presenting quite feminine. I've got eyeshadow on, I've got makeup on. So I started to tap into that more. So I feel like that side started to confuse a lot more people, and that caused a lot more challenges. It's another reason why I changed the way I introduce myself from Camilla, which is arguably quite a feminine name, to KK, which is just my initials, but was a nickname from when I was a child and has definitely helped a lot more people be able to gender me correctly with my pronouns.
it's amazing, like the way that you've gone on this process of self-discovery. And
Thank you.
myself, as a heterosexual male that's married to a female that has a daughter, I'm still coming to terms, and I'm a bit old school when it comes to, like, I was taught in the British education system like yourself, and we were taught certain things at school, and I was taught, male, female, and it was pretty much that. And now I'm learning all these different things. I've learned a lot through my friends that are in the LGBTQIA plus community. I've learned new terms like asexual, pansexual. There's loads of different classifications, and it's great learning
Absolutely.
this. And I'm pretty open the way I talk, and I just ask because if you don't ask, you never know. So it's not that I'm trying to be rude. I like we're friends. Like I just ask and talk, and that's why I'm invited you because my next question comes on to the community as a whole, right? Because I am part of that community, as are you. There's
Yeah.
no you're not part of it because you're this or you're that. We're all part of one community, basically. But
Yeah.
how can the community improve its understanding and acceptance of LGBTQIA plus identities
Mm,
when they were educated a certain way or they only know a certain way and
mm.
maybe they are closed off, their community is narrow, or their friend circle is narrow, or maybe they're in my boat where they're not against anything, they're like open to learn, but they don't have the opportunities to, or they don't really know what to say in the right situation. So most
Yeah.
cases is if we don't know, we're going to stay quiet.
I mean, that's actually that just that last point is something that I think everybody should take as a word of advice. Like, if you don't know, maybe stay quiet, instead of over inserting yourself or trying to say that you know something that you don't. And I pride myself in being an open book, and I tell everybody who's close to me and at work as well. I'm very open because I feel that it can be challenging and it can be scary to feel like you might say the wrong thing and you don't want to offend anybody, but you want to connect to people and you want to understand. So I try and make myself this sort of open book for people to ask me any questions. And there, I will always preface by saying that what I am about to say will be either from my experience or things that I've learned, and it definitely does not apply to every single person in the community. Just like, you know, not one thing can apply to every single person in society or every single person from a particular country or a culture. Everybody,
Correct.
every single human being is different and individual. Um, and there are
Uh,
some things that cover a lot of people, but it definitely won't cover every single person. And it does sort of take some people to have the confidence to be able to have these conversations and educate their friends around them, but it's definitely not a requirement of people who are in the community to educate those who are not in the community. And I think that this
yeah.
is most common to the conversations around cultural differences. And if you're from a different country, if you have a different skin tone, it's not up to those minorities to educate the majorities on their struggles. They want to feel We want to feel supported. We want people to understand us and support us. And I do feel strongly that if I was able to, and yes, okay, I'm tech savvy, I'm social media savvy, but if I was able to do the research and find out things that helped me figure out my own identity, and I also then learned about different kinds of identity. You mentioned a couple already: asexuality, pansexuality, all of the nuances that fall under this beautiful rainbow umbrella. Then I truly believe that others can do that as well. And that applies to everything. You don't need to have somebody from a particular country to tell you what their culture is like and what their country is like. Google search is
Research.
free.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do your own
research is
research. But
free.
then
Do
but
your own
then a
research.
lot with that there is like positive and negative stereotypes
Mm,
that play out.
yes.
People, you know how Chinese whispers they
Mm,
transcend from like you say this is a dog and it ends up this is a cat. So
yeah.
how have you then encountered those positive and negative stereotypes? And how have you dealt with those? Because
Mm,
we're talking about like the identity piece, right? And within that, if people do their own research or ask other people, sometimes it's done through communication, and sometimes negative stereotypes get reinforced through all of that, and
Yeah,
especially the Asian community. Like aunties
yeah.
are like BBC News basically, and they will say like a million things wrong, and it will come out completely the opposite on the other end.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. And you're talking about, how do people learn if they've been educated in a particular way or they've grown up a particular way. And something that I discovered in, my mid-20s was that we're beings that always are learning. We're always learning for everything. And I think we forget that. I think we forget that once we leave education, it doesn't mean that we stop learning. We're constantly learning new things every day. And it's okay to learn things that maybe seem a bit scary. And it's okay to learn things that potentially contradict your culture or the way that you grew up or your religion. And it's important to hold that, we're all, particularly if you're coming from a religious perspective. But personally, I'm not
Yeah,
religious, but if you're coming from a religious perspective, you, to my understanding of most religious texts, I think all religious texts, what it fundamentally comes down to is respecting other human beings and being
correct.
kind to other human beings, being kind to your neighbor, appreciating your neighbor. And your neighbor could be anybody, it, completely different view in every single way possible. They could contradict everything that you believe in every single way possible. But if they're not actively harming you and you have no reason to not actively harm them, and just to be kind to each other and respect the differences and have an agree to disagree moment. And I think that that's how you can actually start to learn and start to understand other people's points of views and their identities, instead of saying, well, I don't believe in this, therefore you can't be. It's, well, I don't believe in this, that's interesting that you are. Either teach me more, or you do you, and I'll do me. And I won't believe it, you believe it, and that's okay. We can actually still be in harmony together, even if we don't agree.
Yeah, that's
It
very,
is,
very true.
yeah, it is really tricky, particularly when you do come from that religious lens, because of, I mean, particularly in, the Muslim religion in Islam, it's the only text that hasn't ever been changed, and one of the only texts that hasn't ever been changed. And it's what the only text I believe that from its original form has said that homosexuality is a sin, which is a strong challenge for people in the community to face. And that is why there's such internal conflict with people who are Muslim and queer, because they 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 don't merge. And so we have to create that path for ourselves and create this community and create our own way, which is difficult to do. And if you're looking at something like Christianity, there are a lot of people who are Christian, and definitely not all of them. There are some people who are deeply religious Christians, who are deeply religious, who are very, very open and very respectful, and really do love their neighbor. Um, but due to the mistranslation that happened in the 40s, they changed the language that said man should not sleep with boy to man should not sleep with man. And changing that changed the entire context of what the Bible teaching was actually trying to say. So there's
Yeah,
there's some things that we're fighting from a religious perspective in terms of education of, well, that was just, should have never been the case. There should never
yeah,
have been an argument. To, okay, I understand that it is an argument from your religious text, but see me as a, again, like I said, I'm not religious, but for those who are, like, see me as a being from God. If you tell me that I'm incorrect in my identity, you're telling God that they're incorrect in how they've created a being. So that's something that those religious people need to internally toy up in themselves. Like, are they going to deny somebody and therefore deny God, or are they going
yeah,
to take another path? And again, on like school education, I grew up in the English education system. Primarily, I actually went to an all girls boarding school, so this idea of binary segregation, men on one side, women on one side, females, males, all these kind of things was really strong in a very classic English boarding school view. And we would get in trouble for hugging our friends in the corridor, and we were 12, 13 years old. We didn't comprehend why these things were issues, and I do wonder whether if it was okay to hug our friends if they were upset or just to say hi, whether those things were embraced and encouraged, and seen maybe as just a positive thing and not a negative thing, that maybe things would be different. But you do see, and I have seen a lot of girls that I went to school with have come out as gay, as lesbians, as queer. And I find that interesting that it did have to take until we were outside of the education system to re-educate ourselves in a point of view that's so different to how we grew up. So it is possible, and I think it will always actually come down to the individual and not their background, not how they grew up. If they have it inside themselves and in their heart that they want to understand and move closer to people and understanding people and building community and keeping community, then it is up to the individual, which is hard when you've got aunties and uncles who are very strict in their points of view. That's for sure. Don't deny that.
So I want to take a moment to talk about intersectionality, because it's a crucial concept to understanding identity. First of all, for our listeners, could you explain what intersectionality is, because they might not be aware of the term, and how has your experience being a South Asian person intersected with your queer identity?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, and I'm not reading a dictionary definitions, so maybe it's not 100% accurate to the actual definition in the Oxford Dictionary, but to what I understand, intersectionality is the holding of multiple identities that create your one identity as a person. So everybody has this, whether you realize it or not. Everybody has multiple identities within themselves, and intersectionality, from my point of view, on myself, comes from the fact that I am a person of color, that I am queer, that I am British, that I grew up Muslim, that I also am mixed and come from an Asian background as well. So that is intersectionality. It's holding all of these different identities at once and realizing that they, first of all, can be held all at once, and second of all, that it's okay that you have multiple identities that come together. And when we look at intersectionality, it, particularly when I was kind of having a lot of self-discovery, it was difficult to figure out where I fit in. Which culture do I connect to? Where do I fit in? Where is my place? And yeah, it's challenging when you hold so many identities. I mean, as a bit of a joke, I always say that I am the best tick box exercise for a company, because I'm a person of color, I'm queer, I'm non-binary, I'm so many things. I was born female. Like, you want a tick box exercise, I've got you covered, don't worry. So it's definitely a challenge inside yourself, but to try and champion all of those things, this is where there's so much positivity and intersectionality, and it's important to talk about, because, like I said, we all hold multiple identities. I think sometimes people forget that being straight and being heterosexual is also a sexuality, and that is another identity for those people who identify in that way. Yeah, it's definitely been tricky, but from my point of view, it's been tricky because I I grew up, like I said, at an all-girls boarding school in Surrey, which meant that I was surrounded by people who, 98% of them did not look like me. Um, so to try and hold, and also as a mixed person as well, I feel like I'm always battling, or had been always battling, my different identities, really desperate to fit in at school, and to embrace my white culture on my white on that side, to fit in with everybody around me, but also being very aware that I'm not in incognito mode. My skin tone is brown. Like, I have melanin in my skin, and my mum is from Singapore, and we grew up Muslim, and I had always been battling these identities, and for a really, really long time, it it hurts my heart to say, but I was pushing away my Asian heritage and didn't want to look at it, didn't want to reflect on it, because I felt that I was already holding so many identities, and I just wanted to fit in. And only when I was in my early 20s was I able to sit down with myself and say, I can't push away this Asian side of me. It is a part of who I am. So let's dive into that. Let's reflect on that. Let's connect into that. Let's embrace it. And since being able to actually do that, I've felt more whole than I ever have when I was trying to push it away and force myself into this white pigeonhole that I am literally not. So it definitely was a really big journey for me to first just embrace it, and hold as a positive thing my Asian side, and
Yeah.
then have to then deal with, okay, well, also now I've embraced my Asian side, but now I'm gay. So how do I deal with this one?
So how have you stayed grounded and maintained your sense of identity in the face of societal pressures? Because
It's
you're
yeah, it's
proud
tricky.
of being queer, and
Mm,
you came from a Muslim family, and
mm,
from my experience, a lot of my Muslim friends, their families are pretty strict. So
mm.
how have you stayed grounded through all of that?
Yeah, it's I think there's a few things that have definitely helped me. The first being that my mum moved to the UK when she was, I think, only 22, so she was super
Okay.
young, and she's lived in the UK for longer than she's lived in Singapore at this
Okay.
point of her life. And I think because of that, and because of all of her, I mean, as Asian families go, my mum is one of 11, so massive family.
Wow. Yeah,
Um,
big family.
yeah, primarily they all live in Singapore, and the ones who don't live in Singapore live in Malaysia. So I think the fact that I didn't have, and my mum didn't have, the everyday pressures of her brothers and her sisters reflecting on me, if I'm just going to look at myself, me, it definitely helped us, um, because we didn't have that additional aunties, uncles pressure. Um, and finding my community has been massive. um I spent a lot of time and effort to create and curate the the community around me. When I came out in 2019, I decided I was going to completely detach myself from heteronormative life. I was going to stop going to straight clubs, and I put those in air quotes for those of you who can't see. Yeah, in quotes, straight club, and your kind of almost straight coded gay clubs, like the gay clubs that you see in Soho are not really where all the queer people go. There's a lot more. It's quite touristy. So, finding the right people to surround myself with. I have a lot of non-binary friends. Nearly all of my friends are in the LGBTQIA plus community. And by actively searching for these people, finding the right people, creating this community between us, that has really helped me feel grounded. And I've mentioned it before, but TikTok, I really, really, really have such an affinity to TikTok, because it really helped me discover so much and helped me see that I wasn't the only one, as I was really, bringing my different identities together. I was really feeling like I was the only one, really, am I the only person in the whole of London who's queer and Asian? Like, surely not. And
You're not.
TikTok helped me. Yeah, I'm really not.
You're
There's
not.
loads of us, and TikTok really helped me see that and find that and connect into that, and it helped me feel more grounded, and it really helped me feel really proud of my identity. And yes, and that's definitely the way to describe how I feel is I feel proud. I feel really proud to be part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and really proud to be mixed British and Asian as well.
That's great. And we're coming to the end of Desi Matters for this episode on identity. And I would like to ask for your advice. What advice would you give to young South Asians who are struggling with their identity and maybe listening and fear of coming out?
First and foremost, I just want to say that you're seen and you are loved, and your identity is valid. That's so important to hear. It took a long time for me to say that to myself, and it's important that you know that, and you can hold that no matter what anybody else is saying around you. You are valid and you are loved, and there is a community here for you. You are not alone. You are absolutely not alone. it it's difficult for it's difficult for us, and there may be times where it's not safe for you to come out to your family and be your authentic self in your family. And for those people who are experiencing that, I say, embrace your identity while keeping yourself safe. If you feel that you cannot be open in your identity at home, don't put yourself under that pressure to do that. Find the find the way, if it's possible, to move out of that space and be able to connect into yourself and embrace yourself and love yourself. And when you start to do that, the universe will come to you. It'll hear your calling, and people in the community will find you, and you'll be able to connect to us, and you'll see that you are not alone. There are loads of there are loads of communities that are particularly that are found on the likes of like Instagram as well, of Desi queer people. There is a massive community of us, so find us. We're here for you. And a lot of these Desi queer communities really truly understand that as people who live at home, that coming out may actually be really unsafe. And we've there are multiple communities that I'm in that you can connect to that really deeply understand that and can help you be able to still connect with them while keeping you safe. And they do that in various different ways, whether it's over WhatsApp, or you're connecting to different connecting on WhatsApp to different groups that maybe have their Instagram pages, but you potentially can't follow them for whatever reason. I'm thinking kind of maybe far more challenging examples than maybe the majority, but it's important to note that some people are living in the reality of this. um you know we're always thinking about these people, especially when we're creating events, or if I'm going to events and I'm hearing about how the admins are making sure that the space is as safe as possible for those people who are in environments at home that aren't safe for them to be open, that they can come to these events and feel safe, that they've done that they've reached out to these people. We're going to keep your identity safe for you. We're going to embrace you. We're going to protect you. We're going to look after you. It is a safe space. And yeah, just to say again, you are loved, you are valid, you are not alone.
Well, that's amazing, KK. Thank you for sharing your journey and insights with us today. Your courage and honesty are truly inspiring, and it's conversations like this that help pave the way for greater understanding and acceptance within our community. So thank you, KK.
JP, thank you so much for having me. It's been so lovely to chat to you today.
Yeah, thank you for chatting with me on Desi Matters. So, to our listeners, If you've been touched by KK's story, please share this episode and continue the conversation in your own circles. Please share, like, and subscribe to Desi Matters. Together, we can create a more inclusive and supportive environment for everyone, regardless of whose identity is what. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, every voice matters on Desi Matters.